This is how you do a blockbuster film, certainly on a budget, on a relatively low budget. But even though it's a blockbuster, that doesn't mean that you just throw away a great story or characterization or depth like this movie provides it. This is like a callback to early blockbuster filmmaking of like Spielberg or like even George Lucas, like Jaws or something like Star Wars, where it's like, we're introducing you to this world, and we have like the spectacle. You have Godzilla. Of course, Godzilla's horrifying, and he's a monster in this movie, very much so, lives up to that King of the Monsters name. But the thing that's going to keep you attached to this movie are the characters. Well, now, everyone, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next part of my show today. And I will be talking about the top 10 best, my top 10 favorite movies of 2023, along with honorable mentions. I will be getting into some honorable mentions, chat. You know, these movies, maybe they just missed the list. Maybe they weren't going to be on my top 10, but I still want to mention them because they had a lot of good things going on them. They had a lot of great performance, a lot of great direction, a lot of great, production. Design. So many different things. I, of course, want to give these a shout out. And I'm very interested to hear your guys' lists as well. I imagine we'll have a lot of variety, a lot of differences. But hey, we'll be talking about our love of film, our passion for film, and what we definitely liked this year. And I have to admit, like earlier on, early in the year, I was just like, oh man, there's not too many truly like, wow, amazing, great movies. Not to say that there aren't like a lot of, great movies or anything this year, but I was like, halfway through the year, I was like, yeah, no, I'm just not feeling this year. But thankfully, Chad, in the back half, I was able to see a number of films that I had missed earlier for, whatever reason. And it became, I have to admit, it became a little difficult for me to come up with this top 10 just because there was like, oh man, I really want to keep this one in the top 10, but I think I like this movie better. And so, man, that's why I have, so many honorable mentions for 2023. But I can safely say that I got a pretty nice list. I'm pretty satisfied with my top 10 for 2023. And of course, it's impossible to see every single movie every year, and there was some films that I really wanted to check out, before I did this list, but I was just unable to. Not to say that I'm never gonna check those out. I will check out those films and I'll do reviews, hopefully in the coming weeks, and be like, I wonder if I would have put this on my list. But we always have that same problem, that same issue every single year. But I will say there were a number of great films this year that I really liked, and honestly, I might end up rewatching, years into the future, Chad. I think we have a few classics this year. But, before we get to the top 10, before we get to even like my kind of top 5 honorable mentions, I did have a number of honorable mentions that I wanted to highlight. And I want to start with a film that, honestly, I didn't even think it would ever be. Any entry in this series would be on my honorable mentions list. But that is Saw X. I actually ended up really enjoying Saw X. Now, for those that don't know, my history of the Saw franchise, I think I liked the first film, well enough, and I liked the third film, but outside of that, I'm not a big fan. I think the 2000s was a really rough period for horror, and that's kind of when we had the torture porn subgenre like really dominate with films like Saw and films like Hostel. And I know that, listen, there's no doubt that the Saw series has been very financially successful, and they have had some entries that have done critically well as well. But, it was never a franchise that I was overly, fond of or something. But, I went into Saw X, like, all right, show me what you got. Hey, they're bringing back, Tobin Bell. Seems to be focusing on him. It's another prequel, sequel. Where this movie is set, like takes place before one or after one. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But what what surprised me so much about this movie was how much I liked it. And what they did so well with this film is that they kind of changed who we typically follow. Like, we're not, following the people that are so often, tortured in these movies and learn more about them. We're following Jigsaw himself. We're following Tobin Bell himself, John Kramer. And he's not really the villain of this movie. He's actually the kind of frame as the hero. It's like, yeah, he tortures and he kills people and tries to teach them lessons and things. And he's like typically framed as the bad guy, although he has like, certain motivations that maybe put him in a different light. Here, he's very much the hero because, of course, John Kramer, Jigsaw, the reason why he's doing a lot of the things that he's doing is because he is dying of brain cancer, and he doesn't have a lot of time left. He still wants to, continue his work, but, of course, he's unable to. And, he hears about this experimental treatment in Mexico, and he's like, wow, I'm gonna go there and do that. And he meets these people, these doctors, and hey, they do the surgery, the procedure on him, and say, hey man, you're cured, you're great. He's like, oh my God, he has a whole new lease on life. But then quickly, later on, he is like, oh, they scam me. They're a bunch of frauds, and they've been scamming people forever. Well, fuck them. I'm gonna go after them and torture them and make them wish that they were dead. And his performance I think was great because we only get so much of Jigsaw, of Tobin Bell in each film. He's not always like the main focus. Oftentimes it's the other characters or it's the traps. But every time he pops up on screen, he's good. Here he's very much the main character, which is a great choice. You actually care about him more than I think you ever have, and you really, really hate these other doctors because they're just a bunch of scumbags and they deserve what's coming to them. And you also got some really nice interactions between him and other people that you're also like caring for as well. I don't want to spoil the movie to you, but there's a moment where he actually bonds with a very young man, and it shows that Jigsaw can be heroic when the situation arises, when he needs to be. And I thought, wow, this was actually really nice. And also the traps. I think that the traps, as the series went on, the traps got more and more ridiculous and over the top and downright dumb. This kind of felt like a nice middle ground where it's like, okay, we have definitely some kind of like craziness, but then we're also kind of keeping it in the realm of possibility. And it was a nice blend. It was a nice balance, and some of them were like really creepy and really scary and really gross. And I totally bought all those sequences with the traps. Everything from the eyeball sucking machine to a guy having to scoop out his brain matter to, someone having to scoop out their bone marrow. It's like all of that like really worked for me. And the movie did. Like, I have to say, it's probably my favorite of the Saw films. It's certainly up there. I think I like it more than the first and the third one. And I'm interested to see because I think they're going to continue on with the franchise, and I hope they continue on with Tobin Bell. Just say like, all right, it's another day in between. I don't know, Saw 1, 2, or 3 before he died. So let's just keep telling those stories. Let's go ahead and keep focusing on him and just have him be this kind of heroic anti-hero. It's like, look, sure, why not? It worked. So I'll give the next sequel, Saw 11. Another chance, Chad. But they nailed it. They nailed it with Saw Wakanda Forever, Chad. Very happy about it. And then moving on from Saw, another movie I wanted to highlight, mention, have been one part of my honorable mentions, is Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. I imagine a lot of people had this on their top 10 best movies of 2023. It's not on my top 10. It's not even on my top 5 honorable mentions. However, Martin Scorsese, of course, he's a legendary filmmaker. He's made some of the greatest movies over the last, several decades, Chad. I mean, everything from Taxi Driver to Raging Bull to Goodfellas, to The Departed, to The Wolf of Wall Street. Like, The Wolf of Wall Street, for me, was my last, favorite Scorsese film. I absolutely love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies of the 2010s. But I think afterwards, I didn't really care for a lot of his films. I didn't care for Silence at all. That movie had numerous issues. I really disliked The Irishman for a variety of reasons, which I've gone into in the past. And so Killers of the Flower Moon was like, okay, let's see. And I do think this is his best film since The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't think it's nearly as good as that movie in any capacity, but I did think it was quite good. I liked that it was a period piece following the Osage Native Americans and how they were exploited by this criminal element, and their land was stolen from them because it was filled with oil. I thought it was a really interesting story, and I think you have 3 amazing performances that definitely deserve some award attention this year in Leonardo DiCaprio, in Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro. So much of the movie is kind of like a crime story, mixed with kind of like epic historical situations. And I really like that. Like, my biggest issue of Killers of the Flower Moon is that it probably shouldn't have been a movie. It should have been a TV miniseries because the film is just way too long. It's unnecessarily long. It's 3.5 hours, and it does not earn that 3.5 hour running time, in my opinion. And even within that 3.5 hour running time, they mostly focus on De Niro and DiCaprio, which was an interesting choice given that the subject matter should be focused on the Native American people in this movie. And Lily Gladstone, who I think is an excellent performance in the movie, she's kind of in the last third or for a section of the film she's unavailable for it, for a very specific reason, which I don't want to obviously spoil for people who haven't seen the movie. So that's why, again, I wish they had made this a miniseries instead of a film, because I feel like it would have been better. And I think it would have gotten more breathing room for the other characters. That was my other criticism of the film, is like they did not focus enough on the other secondary and tertiary characters. And, a lot of bad, horrible things happened to those people in that movie. And I didn't really have like an emotional reaction because I don't know who this person is. They had like a scene ago, and so I figured like in that running time, I wish you actually kind of expanded on them. But in any case, I still think it's a good movie. It's a good movie with some amazing performances. It's also, the cinematography is good, and I'm a sucker for a period piece, especially a Western kind of turn of the century period piece. I really like that aesthetic and that look. So it's it's definitely his best since Wolf of Wall Street, and certainly better than Silence and The Irishman. But moving on, because of the Flower Moon, I would then go to Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. Now, I do enjoy many films in the Mission Impossible series. Like 3 to me is still my favorite, which I've detailed before. I think, one of the issues that Mission Impossible's always had is that they have a villain problem. And I think 3 was like the only film that had like actually a fantastic villain. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. He's like, do you have a wife? Do you have a girlfriend? Because I'm going to find her, and I'm going to hurt her. It's like, that was so intimidating and scary, and I love that sequence. And I really enjoy 4 quite a bit. I think 4 is quite good. And then after that, I would say Fallout. And, Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now they're not going to call it. Now they're going to rename it now. It's not going to be called Dead Reckoning because, sadly, the movie did not perform very well commercially. I think it's one of the bombs this year, technically. They spent so much money on it, and it did not meet expectations. A lot of films didn't. That was one of the surprising bombs this year. However, even though I don't think it's as good as 3, 4, Fallout, I still really enjoyed the movie. There are some terrific action sequences. I really like the cast of Tom Cruise. Simon Pegg. I mean, so many of the other great characters and actors, in that film. I think they do a great job. Like, my biggest criticism, honestly, of the movie itself, and Haley Atwell. Haley Atwell, she's a new actress to the franchise, and I really enjoyed her character, and I loved her interactions with Tom Cruise in the movie. The movie does a lot right. It does a lot right, and has I think a very solid cast. Let me actually just look at the cast for a second here, just so I can remind myself. But yeah. Of course, you had Simon Pegg in the movie, Haley Atwell. Ving Rhames, who has been a veteran of the franchise for years since the original movie. Ving Rhames, I think, is also really good in the movie. But if I have a criticism of the film, again, it's the villain problem, chat. Like, I think the villains kind of suck. You have the Isai Morales, who plays the character of Gabriel, who they retcon. He's like, oh, he's a person from Ethan's past, and he did bad things. I'm like, if you say so. I really didn't care for him. He had no personality. And of course, like, the big bad villain being like, it's AI. And I'm like, okay. All right, sure. A faceless villain. Let's go with that. So that didn't work for me, and I think that's always been an issue with the Mission Impossible franchise. But in terms of the constant character interactions between kind of the main team, the family, I think that's really good. Between Tom Cruise, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, they really have great chemistry. Vanessa Kirby, Rebecca Ferguson, who was introduced in the franchise, I think in 5, I believe. She's also very good in the movie. And Haley Atwell, like, it does a lot right. And it has some great action scenes that are breathtaking, that are just easily rewatchable. But I think it has a really bad villain problem. And I also think it's way too long. Again, a lot of these films, like these films don't need to be like nearly 3 hours long. Like, stop it. But still, a very entertaining action film. Probably one of the better action movies this year, in my opinion. And then another I will mention is David Fincher's The Killer. Now, I've almost seen every single David Fincher movie at this point. The only one I haven't seen is Mank, and he's definitely one of my favorite filmmakers. I love, films like, Seven and, Fight Club. Social Network is still probably my favorite movie of his. And The Killer, I think, is a really interesting action thriller with Michael Fassbender, who plays this assassin who's very cold, very methodical. He has a process. He goes on a job, ends up messing up that job despite, being so methodical and having this sense of structure in his life. He's like, oh, you messed up. And it's basically then him just having to clean up after himself because of the botched job and working his way up the food chain of all the people that hired him. It's not your prototypical just constant like action. It's more of like a character study on this guy and this world of assassins. And I really enjoyed it. I feel like the pacing, especially in the first third, probably won't be for everybody. But if you get past the first third, if you get through it, then I think you're going to end up really, really enjoying the next 2/3. And you might actually be surprised with some of the other characters, some of the other actors that pop in. And there's actually some really wonderful choreography. One of my favorite fight sequences, one of my favorite action scenes this year is not even as beautiful as something as bombastic, something as Mission Impossible is, or even like a John Wick movie. Like, I like this fight sequence in the movie where it's between Michael Fassbender and these gangsters inside this small house. It's very vicious shit. All I'll say is that chair legs are going up holes. Going up people's holes, shit, all sorts of holes. And I was like, oh my God. So I actually really enjoyed The Killer and what it did. It was also great to see Michael Fassbender in a good movie again, because I feel like it's been a long time. It's been a long time since then. Moving on from The Killer. Speaking of killers, chat, Scream 6. Now, you guys may or may not know, but I'm a huge fan of the Scream franchise. The original Scream, directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, is like one of my favorite movies of all time. It's easily in my top 20. I love Scream 2. I'm a big fan of Scream 4 as well, which I saw relatively recently in the last couple of years, and Scream 3 is I would never say it's not an awful movie, but it's definitely the weakest of those films. It's like, it's fine. It's okay. It's whatever. It's not the movie they obviously wanted to make, which, I've talked about before. And of course, the franchise has kind of been brought back to prominence, a couple of years ago, 2022, matter of fact, with Scream 5. And, I was really excited, about it. And I saw it, and I liked it. I liked it a lot, but I didn't love it. I don't think it was on the same level as something with 1, 2, or 4. But with Scream 6, I was like, hey, I'm still interested to see what they do with Scream 6. And I thought Scream 6 was an improvement over 5. Like, they addressed my main criticism of 5 was I didn't really feel the chemistry between any of the new characters. And between whether it be Sam Carpenter or Tara Carpenter or all their friends, like the Meeks twins, like all those people, it's like, I'm not really feeling that. And I'm so glad that they did the core 4. They did the core 4. They leaned into that in the 6th one. And I was like, oh, I feel more invested in these characters. I like their dynamic. They're having the same sense of fun that I feel like the original group did in those earlier Scream movies, whether it be 1 or 2 or hell even 4. So that was really nice. And I like the location. I like the new setting. It's setting in New York City. That made for some really cool, fun scenarios, and also bring back some characters from the past as well, like Kirby. That was really nice. Like, the only thing that obviously bothered me about I critiqued the movie. You can check out my review. But like, in terms of the behind the scenes stuff, like the thing that obviously bothered me is that they Neve Campbell's not in it because they refuse to pay her what she deserves to be paid. She is as much a huge part of that franchise as Ghostface is. She is much of a face of that franchise as the killer Ghostface is, and she deserved to be paid what she should have got, what she deserved. And it's disappointing that they didn't pay her. because I would have liked to have seen her again. They explain why she's not in it, but at the same time, it's like, it's too bad. Although we'll see what happens to the Scream franchise now, chat, since, the stars have left due to a variety of controversies. The director's now gone, and so maybe the Scream franchise is over. Honestly, not a bad one to end on, chat. Could have been worse. So, I really enjoyed Scream 6, and I did think it was an improvement over the previous film, which I still like. I thought it was fun. And then after that, the last of my kind of regular honorable mentions before I get to my top 5 honorable mentions, Past Lives. Past Lives, chat, which is a romantic drama film directed by a person I'm relatively unfamiliar with, Celine Song. I think it's her directorial debut. And it follows these 2 childhood friends pretty much over the course of 24 years. They originally came from South Korea. The girl played by Greta Lee, her and her family emigrate to Canada, Toronto, and then later the United States. And they eventually kind of reconnect like years later on social media. And I really like the film because, one, it's very simplistic. It's not your like typical flashy romantic film or romantic drama. I actually liked how grounded it was because it felt like, any of us could have this same experience where we knew someone when we were younger, I guess like a significant other, and due to circumstances we disconnect, but then we find each other on social media, and then it's kind of like that awkwardness, and we don't really sure how to talk to each other, but eventually we kind of fall back into that groove, and we end up sharing everything and oversharing, and then it gets weird, and it gets complicated, and then we want to see each other because we just want to fuck, but, but due to the circumstances of our lives, we can't do that, and then it's like, we'll talk again, and then you don't, then it's another, like, however many years later, and now you're even older, but now you're more economically secure, but now you have relationships, now you're obsessed with your career, but we still kind of want to see each other because we still have that tether. We still have that connection, and I really enjoyed those aspects of this movie. Again, it's not super flashy. It's low budget, but the chemistry between Greta Lee and Teo Yo, who plays the male character in the film, I think is great. I just love them talking and kind of contemplating their relationship. I think it's going to be one of those kind of underrated films of 2023. And I encourage people to check it out if you want to watch a romantic film that is not something like, on TLC or any of those types of channels, like the Hallmark Channel. It's not one of those. It's not like a Christmas, a Christmas in New York or something like that. One of those small American towns. It's like, no, this is a pretty grounded, realistic take on a romance and regrets. And I really liked it for that. So definitely want to give a shout out to Past Lives. And going from that, Chad, then I wanted to also talk about these 5 other, my top 5. Now, these are my top 5 honorable mentions that were once on my top 10 best movies list, but they got kicked out because of, a film that I liked a little bit more. And the first of those movies I wanted to mention, obviously, is Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Now, if you were to ask me in the 2000s, chat, like, from 2000 to, I guess, 2010, who is the best, the greatest working filmmaker right now, I would have said Christopher Nolan. His filmography during that time was exceptional. Like, I don't really count Following since that was more of like a student film. They got like a very small kind of theatrical release. But he had Memento. He had Insomnia. Then he had Batman Begins, and then he did The Prestige, and then The Dark Knight, which is one of the greatest comic book movie superhero films of all time. And then he followed that up with Inception. I'm like, banger after banger after banger, chat. I'm just absolutely incredible. But there was a turning point. Inception was a turning point where he became less focused on story. He became less focused on characters, and he became more focused on the spectacle of filmmaking, on the technical aspects of filmmaking. And to be completely honest, like, I wasn't like, as much as I was excited for a number of his films in the 20-teens, whether it be Dark Knight Rises, which very disappointing follow up to The Dark Knight, and there's reason as to why that film turned out the way it was. Obviously you wanted to use Heath Ledger, again as the Joker, but sadly Heath Ledger passed. But there was, for variety of reasons that film didn't work, especially Bane, totally insane. I know Batman is Bruce Wayne. That did not work. That was disappointing. But then, like, Interstellar, while beautiful, there was so much of that film I disliked and just doesn't make any sense. Dunkirk was left so cold watching that movie. I think Tenet is nonsensical. and I don't like using this word, chap, but if I saw the movie the year that it came out, I would have said that's the pretentious ass movie. And so for Oppenheimer, I was like, I just don't know. I'm just not sure because I have not been a fan of his 2010 work where I loved his 2000s work. And I think Oppenheimer is his best film in a long time. I think it's his best film since inception. Because although I think it has flaws, he goes back to the characters again, which I think was just so missing. It was just so completely missing from so many of those films in the 2010s. Oppenheimer has some of the best performances this year. There's no question. Cillian Murphy does such an incredible job as J. Robert Oppenheimer. Good old Bobby Oppenheimer, Chaz like to call him. I love good old Bobby Oppenheimer. He does such a great job playing Oppenheimer. Robert Downey Jr. is incredible as Strauss in the movie. Matt Damon delivers a great performance. There's so many other just secondary and tertiary characters, maybe not in it for a lot, but because one of my big concerns is like, okay, you have a lot of people in this movie. It's going to be an ensemble film where someone gets like a minute of screen time and then they just fuck off for the rest of the film. And the thing is, like, Nolan and those writers and those filmmakers, they made sure, like, when they brought someone in, they actually had an impact on the story. They had an impact in the scene. And I really, really love, from Josh Hartnett to Jack Quaid, I thought, wow, a lot of these performances are great. And they definitely deserve the attention and the accolades that they most likely will get. Now, I have some criticism of the movie. I think with this movie, and it's for a long time, you know, people have said that Christopher Nolan does not know how to write women. He just doesn't know how to write women. And this movie's like, yeah, he really doesn't. he doesn't have a clue how to write women, chat. I think Emily Blunt is severely underused in this film, to the point where I was like, I'm kind of confused as to why she kind of took this role, because she's, I think, one of the best working actresses to this day. And Florence Pugh, even though I know she's playing a real life person, her character, her role just did not need to be in this movie at all. I think she has this movie has one of the most awkward scenes I've seen in a film. And where, of course, you know, you have the, you know, the famous, you know, quote that, you know, that good old Bobby Oppenheimer says, "I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds." Well, apparently he heard that quote from Florence Pugh's character while she was fucking him and said, "Hey, read this while you're fucking me." And I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? One of the most unnecessary and just unintentionally funny sex scenes I've seen in a movie, to the point where as we were all watching that movie and just being like, wait, what's going on? I was thinking it, and thank God for the person that said it. The whole audience was dead silent. We were watching that super awkward, just really not very well made scene. And some guy in the theater said, "Destroying that puss." And I'm just like, yep. And people started laughing. And then when they brought the line back, they was like, no, don't do that again. You fucked it up, which is kind of amazing. But despite the women not being written well and that really terrible scene, so much of the movie is very good and features some of the best performances of the year. Other criticism, it's way too long, unnecessarily long. I was like, again, it was the Flower Moon problem. It's like this. I would have preferred this as a miniseries, as an epic TV miniseries. Because people are saying like, oh, we got to watch The Bomb. You know, we got to watch The Bomb in IMAX. And I'm just like, I watched it in a real theater, and I was like, it's fine. You know, it's like, oh, okay, that was well done, but not to the point where I'm just like, oh my God. So again, I think it's indulgent. I think it's a very indulgent movie. And it definitely has some awkwardness in terms of how they write the women. But in terms of so many of the other performances, from Cillian Murphy as good old Bobby Oppenheimer, to Robert Downey Jr., to Matt Damon, to so many of the other secondary and tertiary characters, they do such a great job in it. So I wanted to give Oppenheimer a shout out despite some criticisms. Moving on from that, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, chat. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem. Now, I'm not like a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan. I didn't really grow up with TMNT. I was always aware of it. I think I watched maybe like the 2003 animated series. Like, oh, okay. But, you know, I've been exposed to different aspects of it. I've seen some of the original episodes of the original series. I've read the not Frank Miller comic, well, the parody of Frank Miller's work, which is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, is a parody of Daredevil and many of other Frank Miller's comics, which is so funny. Of course, I've read that. And, you know, I've seen like the first movie. I did a review for it not too long ago, like a couple years ago, and I've also seen the third film in the original series at a Pizza Hut with no volume, and I just had to read the subtitles. Remember that when they time travel back to Japan. So going into this, I was like, okay, I was interested because the art style, like we live in a kind of cool time now when it comes to animation. We've seen some films flop, but we've seen the proliferation of different animation styles. Like for so long, we've kind of been in this 3D style, which was popularized by Pixar. Like everyone started doing it, from Disney proper to DreamWorks to everybody else. And just like, God. But then like Into the Spider-Verse came out like in 2018 and it had that 2.5D style. People were like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then we started to see more films like that, like Mitchell vs. the Machines. And while Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles it's not exactly that same animation style, it's a different type of animation. It's very asymmetrical. It's kind of ugly, but I love that. It's ugly, it's grotesque in a beautiful way, where all the characters are lumpy and misshapen. The backgrounds are all kind of contorted, but it has like a big sense of personality. And that's what this movie has. It has a lot of personality in terms of its characters and in terms of its world and its world building. And one of my criticism, I think, of TMNT has always been like, I've never kind of bought that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are teenagers. Like, I get it, they're Mutant Ninja Turtles, yeah, but they never was like, these are teenagers? And this is the first film that I've ever seen with them where, wow, they actually feel like teens. The way they talk, interact, and they actually like really feel like brothers. And I was like, I was really jiving with that quite a bit. Maybe, I think they definitely kill some jokes. They say it like some jokes like way too many times, and they kind of kill the joke, sadly. So that's like my criticism I have. But so much of the voice acting did work. So much of the animation worked. I love that they didn't focus on Shredder. It's a whole new villain, and with Ice Cube as Superfly, who I thought was really cool. Yeah, Giancarlo Esposito briefly in there as Baxter Stockman. That was great. Jackie Chan as Master Splinter. He was like a standout to me. I love Jackie Chan as Splinter in the movie. It did so many different things. And listen, I am not a TMNT fan. I'm not that I hate the property. I just didn't grow up with it. And so I think this movie was perfect for me because I didn't go in with any expectations. And I ended up really enjoying the movie quite a bit. It's not my favorite animated film of the year, but it's definitely one of my favorite. I think it's a fun film. And I recommend people check it out. Moving on to the next honorable mention, Chad, I have They Clone Tyrone. You guys for months were telling me about They Clone Tyrone. And I was like, okay, I'll eventually check it out, I think maybe it was like a month and a half later, I finally watched it. And I love this. This is from first time, I believe, director Jewel Taylor. This was his directorial debut. And it stars John Boyega, Tiona Paris, and Jamie Foxx, who play a drug dealer, a former prostitute, and a pimp who uncover a massive government conspiracy in their neighborhood. A government conspiracy that tries to repress basically black people. And keep them in certain places in the country. And one, the performances from those three are great, along with a lot of secondary and tertiary characters. But just the look of the movie, the movie, you guys told me it's like a John Carpenter film. And it definitely does. It feels like a John Carpenter movie from just, the use of neon and the film grain and the style and the lighting. It has so much mood. The score, one of my favorite scores this year is for They Cloned Tyrone. It's like, I love this type of science fiction fantasy movie. Where it's kind of like it's dirty and gritty, but it has so much just personality and use of color. It's not like everything's a blue-gray color palette in the movie. There's so many different shades of color. It has a wonderful color palette in the movie, and it like really stood out to me. And so like that was a Netflix movie that like just works so much, and I loved it. I loved it. Like my only Kiefer Sutherland. Kiefer Sutherland's in it. He plays the bad guy. He played several bad guys. Also really good in the movie. Just a sumbitch in the film. My only criticism is that there's like, and it's so weird because so much of the makeup in the movie is actually great, but there at the end we're introduced to a person in old man makeup. I'm just like, why did you do that to him? Why did you do that? Just cast an older actor. Like, I don't know why it's like, no, we're going to put a bunch of goop on this guy. It's like, no, just cast someone who's a little older. And that's totally fine. And we'll be like, oh, that's who that is. Like, and I'm like, why'd you do that? So other than that, but it's a great movie. And speaking of genre, Evil Dead Rise. I am a huge fan of the Evil Dead franchise, chat. From the original film, obviously Evil Dead 2, then Army of Darkness, and obviously Ash vs. Evil Dead, and reading all the comics and things like that. I love what Sam Raimi and his family, and of course Bruce Campbell have created. And I was unsure about this movie at first because I am not the biggest fan of the Evil Dead remake that came out in 2013, I believe, directed by Fede Alvarez. I just thought, okay, we're just doing the same film again, except we're now doing it with really unlikable characters. Great. And you didn't have a charming protagonist in that of Ash Williams, who's one of the greatest scream queens, scream kings of the horror genre. And this was going to be another kind of this is not connected to Ash, though it probably takes place in the same world as Ash. And I was like, all right. And they're kind of changing location. It's not going to be at the cabin. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. It's going to be in an apartment building, they said it's a skyscraper, but it's more of an apartment complex. And I was like, okay. And I saw the first trailer and I was like, okay. I was really liking it. This is directed by Lee Cronin, who's done some other stuff before. And, it has some recognizable faces, Lee Sullivan, Elisa Sutherland, who is just across all the marketing for the movie. And it pretty much focuses on these two estranged sisters who, along with Lisa Sutherland's children, are probably just trying to survive the night after one of her kids uncovers the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. And I was so impressed with this movie. It has a lot of scary moments. It's bloody. It's gory. I like the number of the characters. Lisa Sutherland, I think, gives one of the best supporting performances this year as the main Deadite. She gets possessed early on in the film. Mommy's sleeping with the maggots now. Everything that she did was great in terms of physically what she brought to the role was fantastic. But then how manipulative she was. And I was like, yeah. And so I think it brought new eyes to the Evil Dead franchise. And what's so great about the movie is I think it's great for even if you're a longtime fan, but if you've never seen Evil Dead, you can easily watch this movie because it feels very standalone. And I really liked it a lot. It was groovy, Chad. It was very, very groovy. And then moving on from Evil Dead Rise, I also want to highlight in this movie, these next two were, I was like, oh, it came down to the wire with these next two. Megan, which came out very, very, very early in 2022, came out the first week of January. And it focuses on this artificially intelligent doll who develops self-awareness and becomes super hostile to anyone who kind of comes between her and her human companion. And this movie, when we saw that first trailer, in whatever, I guess it was late 2022, and we just saw, first of all, Megan just looks so weird and creepy and has an uncanny valley look to it. It's you're human-esque, but you're obviously not human. And then we just see her doing crazy, goofy shit popping and locking and dancing. And I was like, what's going to be? And then seeing it's just a great horror comedy. It's a great horror comedy. You're kind of on Megan's side through a good portion of the movie, even though she's fucking people up that kind of deserve it. But then there you have that turn. It's all right, we got to put her down. We got to put her down. Megan, I'll tell you this right now. Megan is a better critique on artificial intelligence than something like The Creator or Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. Megan has more depth than either of those movies. But it also just has a lot of fun. It's just having a lot of fun. And it was one of the first big hits of this year, of 2023. And it made me want a sequel, which apparently we are going to be getting. I don't know exactly when that sequel's coming out. I don't know if it's even in 2024, perhaps in 2025. But I cannot wait for Megan 2.0. But yeah, I had this on my top 10 list for the longest time. But I had to remove it because there's some other films that I just liked a little bit more. My last honorable mention that was briefly on my top 10 list, but I had to remove it because there was just some other stuff that I'd seen soon after, is Poor Things, chat. Poor Things, which is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. And no, he is not a Star Wars alien, chat. He is a director. He's done things like The Lobster and Killing the Sacred Deer and The Favorite, which was probably still my favorite of his movies. But I really enjoyed Poor Things. This is pretty much his interpretation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where we follow a scientist, Dr. Baxter, played by Willem Dafoe, who ends up creating a Frankenstein-esque individual, where it's a woman who committed suicide, and he takes the brain of her unborn baby and puts her in her head, and she pretty much experiences life, childhood all the way up to adulthood, but in an adult body. And she meets a variety of characters, including Mark Ruffalo, who plays a lawyer who is so self-absorbed and selfish and obnoxious. And she, specifically Emma Stone as Bella, embarks on this self-discovery, this odyssey in the Victorian age, and has a sexual liberation, but also liberation for herself. And listen, this movie is not going to be for everybody. This movie is very odd, like a lot of Yorgos Lanthimos' films. However, this features, I think, some of the most beautiful production design, some of the most fantastic art direction this year, but also some of the best performances, especially for Emma Stone. She probably is my favorite, for like best actress this year. What she brings to her role, the physicality, the weirdness, the fact that she has to play just like, I have to play like a fucking derpy baby. I gotta be a derpy baby in my own body, and she nails it. She does such a great job. The things he does, she's a wild card. Like, you don't know what she's gonna do every other scene. What's gonna come out of her mouth? But it's usually very, very funny. Willem Dafoe, I think, gives a great performance. It's more reserved than what we're used to with him, but it's still great about a man who has experimented throughout so much of his life and has kind of self-harmed himself as well. And Mark Ruffalo, he's always been a great actor, but we don't often see him play these types of characters because he typically plays a lot of characters that are heroic in nature, that are nice, that are kind, that are altruistic. This character is anything but. He is a selfish prick, and he's all about himself. But he's so funny. It's hilarious. And I love this movie. I think it's a little too gratuitous in terms of the sex stuff. A little awkward. I don't know. I wouldn't suggest watching this around Christmas with the folks or anything. But it does so much right. And I really love the three main performances in the film. But those are all of my honorable mentions, chat. My original honorable mentions, my top 5 honorable mentions. But now, my friends, we're going to go ahead. We're finally going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and move on to the top 10 best movies, my top 10 favorite movies of 2023. And starting with number 10, chat, my 10th best favorite movie of 2023, and that is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Obviously, this is the sequel to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from 2018. It's set in the shared multiverse called the Spider-Verse. You have many of the original filmmakers, producers returning for this movie. Takes some time after the events of the original film. Miles Morales is coming into his own as Spider-Man, but still dealing with the typical struggles that any Spider-Man would deal with. And when the multiverse comes under threat, thanks to the D-list villain, The Spot, who becomes very terrifying, he has to team up with old faces and new faces alike. Everyone from Haley Steinfeld's Spider-Woman, Spider-Gwen, to Oscar Isaac's, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. And it's very interesting. I think it's easy for a lot of people to say, like, oh, this filmmaker clearly got carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do for this film. But it usually applies to, like, live action movies. It's often, like, not the case. It's often, like, not the case for, like, animated films. But as I was watching the movie, and it's like 20 minutes. It's like which is amazing opening with focusing on Spider-Gwen and her life and her dimension, everything that she's going through with her father, and she's being hunted because she's viewed as like this vigilante who's responsible maybe for believed to be responsible for the death of her Peter Parker of her dimension, who was like the Lizard of her world, which I thought was really cool. But it's like 20 minutes before we get to like the opening title card. I was like, Jesus. And that's when I realized, like, oh, they got carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. Because to this day, I still say this. I don't care what anyone says. Sony had no idea what they had within the Spider-Verse. I feel like they just let those original filmmakers Joaquin Dos Santos and Ken Powers and Jessica K. Thompson, and obviously, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who produced the movie, do whatever they want. It's like, hey, this is the money you're getting. Do whatever you want. Whatever. We're more interested in Venom and Morbius. We're more interested in Morbin time, right? And so they had no fucking clue what they had. The movie came out, blew everyone away. It wasn't like a huge box office success. It did well, but it wasn't like $500 million or something like that, right? It was like 300 something. But it it was one of the best movies of the year. A lot of people would honestly say it's probably one of the best Spider-Man films of all time, if not the best, one of the best superhero films of all time. It's like, wow, it's had such a positive impact on the industry in a great way, and I'm so happy that it exists. And I love Into the Spider-Verse so much. But I still believe Sony had no idea what they had. And so after the success of that, they went, oh shit, okay, we're going to invest in this because this is something really special now. And so I think that's what they do with Across Spider-Verse. And I think it does a lot right. I think the characters and the depth in which they give them, the voice acting from, Shamik Moore to Haley Steinfeld to Brian Tyree Henry, Jake Johnson, who's back, Jason Schwartzman, who plays the Spot, who goes from very funny and pathetic to absolutely terrifying. I'm a sucker for a D-list comic book villain. Yeah, you know that. So that was great. Isa Rae, Shea Wim, Greta Lee again, Daniel Kaluuya, Mahershala Ali, Oscar Isaac. I said it is an incredible cast. They all do a great job. The action is gorgeous. It's beautiful. The fight scenes and choreography is stupendous. I think it does have pacing issues. I think the first third has pacing issues. It takes its time. Which some people, that might not bother a lot of people. I think, but for me, I was just like, okay, what's the main conflict here? What are we building towards? So I still would say, like, Into the Spider-Verse is still better for me, but Across the Spider-Verse still just does so many things right, and it's such a great animated film and such a wonderful superhero movie in a year which that the genre definitely suffered. So yeah, Across Spider-Verse is definitely my number 10 favorite film of 2023. But moving on to that, Jim, moving on to number 9, my number 9 best movie of 2023 is Nimona. Now, some people may not have checked this film out. It was a Netflix film, but an interesting fact, this is technically the last Blue Sky animation movie. The studio obviously got shut down by Disney when they acquired 20th Century Fox. They saw what they had and they're like, nah, we're gonna pass on this. No, thank you. And then it went to Netflix. This is an adaptation of a graphic novel of a series of the same name. However, it does make some changes. It's set in a kind of like a sci-fi fantasy world influenced by the Middle Ages. And, it features the voices of Chloe Grace Moretz, who plays the titular character of Nimona, who is a shape-shifting creature, and Riz Ahmed, who plays a former knight Ballister, who is blamed for the murder of the queen of his kingdom. And again, similar to something like in the Spider-Verse, I appreciate that this has a different type of animation style. And that it kind of shows a type of world that we don't often see in a lot of mainstream theatrical films, like this science fiction world, but that's heavily influenced by the Middle Ages. That really worked. And the thing that worked for me so much about the movie was just this relationship between these two characters, these two would-be monsters, who originally probably would be enemies. And I think it's probably Chloe Grace Moretz's best role in quite some time. She sounds like she's having so much fun with this character, and the things that do with her is great. Everything with the shape shifting, but what she's struggling through, what she's going through. She's a creature, and she's a person who has experienced such profound loss and tragedy, and it just wants to be accepted, and wants to have a friend. And then you have someone like Ballister, who, again, in this movie, he comes from the lower classes of this world, and he was poor, and people looked down at him because of that. And he's always struggled, and of course he becomes a pariah, and they're like, well, of course he'd be that way because of where he came from. Like, what the themes that these movies playing, there's a lot of LGBTQ themes in this movie. And I think how they all handle that, like it's not the defining aspects of all these characters, but it's a part of who they are. And I loved how they weave that through the film's narrative, and I think it has one of the best kind of third acts of this year. It's such a heartfelt movie, and I've watched it several times this year, and I really recommend it. Like my only complaint is there's just this really annoying character in the film. Who I think is like very he kind of sounds like this, and like if he was removed, then this would be like higher on my top 10 list. But other than that, when it comes to the performances, the world building, how they handle all the themes and they weave it through all the narratives, I think it's a great movie, and an animated film that I think is probably going to be overlooked by a lot of people this year, and certainly by all the award shows or whatever. But I encourage you guys to check out Nimona because it deserves attention. It deserves a lot of new attention. Moving on from Nimona, we get to my number 8, my 8th best movie of 2023, and that is The Boy and the Heron, which, of course, this is the latest film, possibly the last film from Hayao Miyazaki. Of course, I am a huge Hayao Miyazaki fan. I watched so many of his movies over the course of my life. Everything from Princess Mononoke, which is probably my favorite film of his, to Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, to Spirited Away, to Laputa Castle in the Sky, Porco Rosso. The man has made amazing work. I mean, I've enjoyed all his movies, maybe the exception of Ponyo. Everything else from him, I've either really liked or downright loved. And The Boy and the Heron, it takes place sometime after World War II. Follows this boy named Mahito, who loses his mother in a hospital fire during the war. Him and his father and his new mother, his father remarried, they move out to the country, and he's bitter, he's angry, he's rageful, but he encounters a magical heron voiced by Robert Pattinson, who says Mahito, and it's completely unrecognizable, along with a fantastic English dubbed cast. And obviously including Robert Pattinson, but also Christian Bale and Florence Pugh and Dave Bautista and Willem Dafoe. But he uncovers this magical world where he's told that he can find his mother and bring him back, and goes on this fantastical adventure and learns how to handle his grief through his experiences. And listen, I am a huge fan of 2D animation. I am very sad that we just don't really see anymore in a theatrical setting. Not to say that we don't have great 2D animated TV shows and streaming shows. There's no doubt, but I really miss that. I'm sad that has just kind of gone away. And so to see like a 2D movie on a big screen again, and one that is just so lovingly crafted by someone like Hayao Miyazaki is so thrilling. It is a gorgeous looking movie. I love the colors, and just the backgrounds have so much details, from the little ponds, the lily pads, to just these old homes and these grand epic, just sunrises and these magical, fantastical world filled with vegetation and birds and parakeets, murderous parakeets. I really enjoyed it. I think that the first third of the movie has pacing issues. I agree with that, but it didn't bother me so much because I just like the intimacy. I love the coziness of the beginning of this film and getting to know the typical lives of these characters, what they do from day to day. So that didn't bother me as much as other people. But I understand. But I really enjoyed The Boy and the Heron, and it's not my favorite Hayao Miyazaki movie, but it is definitely one of my favorite movies of 2023. And then moving on from The Boy and the Heron, get to my number 7, the 7th best movie of 2023. And that is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, back in the day, chat, back in 2014, which is like, it's crazy. That's now 10 years ago. I didn't know, but I wasn't sure about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. First of all, like, I barely knew anything about the Guardians of the Galaxy, even though I consider myself, like, I'm a Marvel fan. I read a lot of the comics, but in terms of, like, cosmic Marvel, I knew practically nothing about it, or very little. Especially when it came to the Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was like, I knew about, there's Talking Raccoon, and I know there's a tree that says I am Groot. Other than that, no, nothing. I saw the trailer, I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure about this. James Gunn's like, he's done some stuff I'd like, some stuff I haven't been fond of. I'm like, okay, we'll give it a shot. We'll check it out. And I loved it. I love that first movie. James Gunn did such a great job of introducing us to characters that the mainstream, including myself, knew nothing about. And we fell in love with them. And I think he told a great science fiction, fantasy, just swashbuckling action adventure film. And then we got the sequel, and where I didn't like the sequel as much as the first one, you know, it was still so much focus on the character. I thought he addressed the villain problem with the character of Ego, played by Kurt Russell, who I loved in that movie. But then with Volume 3, I was, you know, it was such a, what a weird history of this film. Him being fired off the movie because of some old jokes on his Twitter account, and then going to DC and then making the Suicide Squad, which was great. And then Disney's like, all right, we're sorry. Come back and make the movie. Come back and make the movie. And I think you can make an argument that this is the best Guardians of the Galaxy film. I think again, we were in a time where so many superhero films failed this year. They came up short, but this one does not, in my opinion. This one nailed it. And I think it helped the fact that this was a goodbye to many of these characters, to this era of Marvel. And it's still a funny movie, but it's also a very somber movie. It's a sad film, and I like that so much of it was focused on Rocket Raccoon, and it was so much of the story was told from his perspective, and we learn about his history and his tragic history with his childhood and his friends, and how he was horrifically abused by this villain, the High Evolutionary. Just wanted to create the perfect world, the perfect race, and didn't care how many people and civilizations he had to destroy to do it, destroy so many lives. And like that part of the story, like it has one of my favorite scenes in this year. Just again, spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but when the High Evolutionary ends up killing so many of Rocket's friends, from Layla to Teefs to Fly, and that wail that he does is like, oh my God, I felt that, chat. I was like, oh my Lord, it was so tragic but so beautiful. And then everything else with all the other characters, like for Star-Lord, just not dealing with his grief well at the loss of Gamora, with the events of Infinity War and Endgame. I think Chris Pratt does a great job. Dave Bautista is excellent. They gave so much more for Mantis to do. Nebula is great in this movie. What Karen Gillan did, oh my God, Nebula's one of my favorite characters in the MCU. Like she went from like this kind of one note, it's like, Ronan, I want to kill my sister, to now it's like, if anyone hurts her, I'll be very mad. And I loved her in this movie. I've kind of softened. Originally, I wasn't like feeling the High Evolutionary scary. I thought he screamed. Like, he was good. He was really good in the movie, but I thought like he screamed so much dialogue. But I've watched clips. I want to sit down and just watch the movie again. But I've watched clips since then, and I was like, I really liked his performance. Like, he is just such a nasty, irredeemable, just piece of shit of a villain. And his interactions with Rocket, I thought were great. And also just Rocket realizing, like, I am a raccoon. Rocket Raccoon. He finally says it. The only weakness in the film, I thought, was Will Poulter as oh God, what's his name? Adam Warlock. He wasn't bad. I just felt like the character was underwritten. It felt like, oh yeah, shit, we set that up in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Let's put it in here. And I want them to do, of course, like, he's so connected with Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet. Well, that's over now, and so he felt like an element that, like, yeah, we're not sure what we're doing. Again, he's not bad, but you could tell that he was kind of superfluous to so much of the story. So I'm curious to see how they're going to handle him in the future. I hope they handle him a little bit better. But other than that element, so much of the character stuff worked. It's a gorgeous movie. It's a terrifying movie. It's got some epic action sequences, but it has so much heart. It has so much, and the music, James Gunn, he makes music. Music's another character in so many of his movies. Very similar to make someone like a Quentin Tarantino, how the music feels like a character in his films. He does the same thing. And a lot of people didn't like the music in this movie, or some people did, I should say. I fucking loved the music. I thought it really fit, especially the opening and Creep and things. I thought that was great. The last songs in the movie. So I really liked it a lot. And moving on from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, chat. My number 6. This is my bottom 5, chat. But number 6, my sixth best movie of 2023 is Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Now, this is coming from the team of Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly, who previously worked on the film Game Night, which was such a big surprise comedy hit a few years ago. I really liked that movie. And when I was told that it was those guys doing this movie, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes me pretty happy. I think this is in good hands. And it was, because this is one of the best, one of the most underrated blockbuster action adventure. This is the return. This is the triumphant return of the action adventure film. But this is one of the best and most underrated action adventure blockbusters this year. I think it is probably the most underrated. And of course, this is based on the tabletop role playing game Dungeons and Dragons, set in the Forgotten Realms campaign, and it has no connection to the original Dungeons and Dragons movie from 2000 or its sequels. It follows just a team pretty much of rogues trying to perform this heist, but also save the realm. You have a fantastic cast in Chris Pine, and Michelle Rodriguez, and in Justice Smith, and Sophia Lillis, and Hugh Grant, who steals like every scene he's in. What's so great about this movie is that it walks the tightrope perfectly, and that it pleases Dungeons and Dragons fans, but it also pleases audiences that know nothing about Dungeons & Dragons. You can go into the watch this movie and be like, this is just a really fun fantasy movie. This is a really fun action-adventure fantasy film with a lot of fun comedy and a lot of great... And the character interaction, that's what I love, is that the moment-to-moment interaction between all these characters is great. You know, and it's not like constant, like, sarcastic, smarmy dialogue or anything like that. Like, no one, it's not like, oh, these characters are dark and brooding, and let me give you 10 minutes of exposition about my backstory as we do slow motion. It's like, it's not that at all. It's they despite how fantastical these settings are, they have all these different personalities, and they bounce off each other in a really fun way. And it's got some great effects and some great little action sequences too. So yeah, I'm sad. I'm so sad that more people didn't check this movie out, because it really deserves to be watched by more people. And because I want to see sequels to this. I want to see spin-offs to this, because there's the amount of fun that you can have in this world is endless. It's infinite. And what they did with this movie, I thought was great. Was so great. But moving on, chat, to my number 5, my top 5, chat. Let's start with my 5th best movie of 2023. And that film is Talk to Me, the horror film Talk to Me, chat, which is from, I believe... this is first-time theatrical directors, the Filippo brothers. Now, they are probably best known for their YouTube content, which I've seen is actually like really, really funny. And this film, it follows a group of teens who discover that they can contact ghosts and spirits while interacting with a severed and embalmed hand. And once they contact that person, they're able then to allow that person in like that ghost inside of them and pretty much get a high. Like I'll tell you right now, I'm not I love horror. Horror is like one of my favorite genres of all time, but I'm not the biggest fan of ghost movies. I feel like so many of them do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Of course, there are exceptions. Obviously, there's a number of films I like. Like I'm a huge fan of the original Poltergeist. I really like the others, of course. But there's so many. This is like, all right, we're in a fucking house and the ghosts move a chair around, and now they're just, it's like, it's little by little until the third act where it's like, all right, do we got to banish the ghost or something? All right, okay, I got it. This one's so different, because this is a ghost story about how one handles grief, and they treat it like drug addiction, and where you have this character played by the actress Sophie Wilde, I believe. I think the actress is Sophie Wilde, who plays the lead character, and she has lost her mother, and she has not handled it well, and she thinks that one of the ghosts is actually her mother, and she starts abusing the severed and embalmed hand, and that causes a lot of problems for herself and other people in her life, and leads to some catastrophic consequences. And has one of the most disturbing scenes of violence I've seen this year in a horror movie, or just in any film. Obviously, it involves a lot of eye violence, a lot of eye gouging. That's all I'll say. And I think it has one of my favorite endings in quite some. I was like, oh God, what an ending! I thought it was a brilliant way to end it. But these guys, the Danny and Michael Filippo, I want to see more of their work, because I'm like, all right, what are you gonna do next, guys? I think they're doing a sequel to this, which I can totally see them do a sequel. That's fine. But yeah. What a great what a great movie, what a great horror film, and what an original way to handle the ghost genre, a genre that is so often just does the same things over and over and over again. So very, very refreshing for Talk to Me. Moving on, chat, to my fourth best movie of 2023, and that movie is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which, of course, is the only adaptation of Judy Blume's iconic novel, 1970 novel of the same name, where we follow the character of Margaret as she, is growing up. Even though her life's great, she's going back from summer camp and everything. She's going back to New York. Can't wait to do it. Well, guess what? You and your family have to move from the city of New York City to the suburbs of New Jersey. It's like, oh, God. And to her, it could possibly be like the worst thing ever. And she goes to the suburbs of New Jersey and she encounters all these new girls, but all these new little girls are talking about, periods. They're talking about boobs. They're talking about their menstrual cycles. And she's like, what is this? She doesn't, but she wants to fit in. And so it's like, I got to kind of learn about all this stuff and go on this journey. But also it's like, what's my chosen religion? My dad's Jewish, my mother's Christian. They decide not to pick religion for me. They want me to do it myself. It's like, who am I? But she's always having these conversations with God, always trying to ask his advice for things. As she's going, through her life, and encountering very confusing situations. And as confusing as those situations are, this movie is adorable. This movie is just a wonderful family film where it covers, things that we all go through in our lives, or people that we know have gone through in our lives. It has a fantastic cast. First of all, Abby Ryder Forston is the actress who plays Margaret in the movie. You probably have seen her before. She plays Scott's daughter, Lane's daughter, his younger daughter, in the Ant-Man films, in Ant-Man 1 and Ant-Man and 2. She's the little girl where I love that scene where he gives her the ugly rabbit. She's like, he's so ugly, I love him. And he's like, yeah. She has that same exact charm in this movie as Margaret. But the cast is also buoyed by several other people. Rachel McAdams, I think people are sleeping on her performance in this movie as Margaret's mother. Like, she is going through her own stuff, especially with, some emotional and psychological abuse from her parents. After she decided to marry a Jewish man, played by Benny Safdie, who's not in the movie a lot, but when he's in, it's like, he's very good. And I bought the two of them. Like, as a couple, they had this insane chemistry in the movie. And Kathy Bates is, I'm a huge Kathy Bates fan, chat. And I always like when she pops up in things. Of course, she's like in one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Misery. And she steals so many scenes, and she's great. She plays the grandmother of Margaret, the grandmother on Benny Safdie's side of the family. And it's just this adorable, wholesome movie. And I regret it because, I never read the original novel. I've always knew about it. I always knew about it in the pop culture zeitgeist. Like, oh, yeah, Judy Blume. Yeah. Are You There, God's Meets Margaret? It's been parodied. It's been talked about in pop culture for years. And watching the movie made me go, oh, man, I wish I read this movie when I was younger. And maybe one day I will read the book because I kind of want to. But if you have not, even if you have read the book or if you haven't read the book, you're going to love this movie. It is a quintessential family cinema. I highly, highly recommend it. Love the movie. And then moving on, speaking of love, chat. Number 3, we're in the top 3 now, chat. And my third favorite movie of 2023 is The Iron Claw. Now, I reviewed this movie very, very recently. And after seeing it, I was like, this is going on my list. Because this is one of the best sports dramas of all time. It focuses on the Von Erich wrestling family in the 1980s, and sadly the many tragedies that the family went through, specifically for the Von Erich brothers. The tragedies ranging from suicide to losing of limbs. Constant psychological and emotional abuse from their parents. Has a fantastic cast, and Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White and Harris Dickinson, Holt McCallany, Lily James is in the movie. And again, like I know about wrestling, but I'm not like a big wrestling fan. I watched wrestling as a kid in the 90s, like with my dad on television. I know more about wrestling via the wrestlers who crossed over into acting, like Dave Bautista or John Cena, right? And we've done quite well for themselves. But I nothing against wrestling. It just wasn't my thing. But that's what's so great about the movie. Like, you don't have to be a wrestling fan to get into this movie, but you can also be a wrestling fan as well to watch this film, because you probably have a lot more context and things. And man, this was the movie this year that probably made me cry the most. I got watery-eyed several times in this film. And this is Zac Efron's. I mean, everyone does a great job. Holt McCallany's a son of a bitch in this movie as Fritz Von Erich, the dad. Oh man, you're gonna love to hate him, chap. But he does a really good job. This is Zac Efron's best film. This is his career best as Kevin Von Erich, I believe, in the film. And I mean, not only does his physical transformation is incredibly impressive, there's no question, but he nails every single emotional scene, every character action in this movie. And he carries a lot of the movie, and he has to like really provide this raw emotion with so many characters. And like one of the last lines of this movie, I think, is incredibly. It's hopeful, but at the same time, it's incredibly powerful. He deserves an Oscar nomination, and I kind of feel like the Iron Claw is being ignored for whatever reason. I don't know, because it has to deal with wrestling or something. I'm not sure, but this movie deserves a lot of recognition, and I'm hoping that it'll eventually get some more, because it's great. It's great. The director, Sean Durkin, I haven't seen some of his other films, but man, I would nominate him for Best Director as well. So impressed with this movie, chat. And again, you don't have to be a fan of wrestling to get into it. Wrestling is a part of the movie. You see wrestling and all that, and they point to like wrestlers of that era, But it's so much of the drama and the emotion, the tragedy surrounding this family, and I loved it. But I have two more, chat. Top two. This was a surprise. Number two was a huge surprise for me, because I don't think I ever would have, not to say that I don't like this franchise. I have a lot of love for this franchise, but to think that would be in like my top 10, my second favorite movie, the second best movie of 2023, but that is Godzilla -1, chat. I mean, I've been a lifelong Godzilla fan for years, for decades at this point. Grew up with the movies, watching on VHS as a kid. During the Showa era and the Heisei era, chat, owning all those movies, having so much fun. I mean, I was a dinosaur kid, and well, if you like dinosaurs, you're probably gonna like Godzilla. He's just a radioactive, fire-breathing Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? And those movies have always been fun. I always had my favorite Godzilla movies, like Godzilla vs. Destroyer, and the one with the worst title, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, All Out Attack. Like, also very good though. And Godzilla vs. Biollante. There's a lot of solid, really entertaining Godzilla movies. This is the best Godzilla movie of all time. I want to go see this movie again. I want to own it. But what they do here, this is a palate cleanser. That's what this movie is. Godzilla -1 is a palate cleanser to the sloppy blockbuster filmmaking that I think we've certainly received in 2023, but also just in America for several years. This should be used as an example of, like, this is how you do a blockbuster film, certainly on a budget, on a relatively low budget. But even though it's a blockbuster, that doesn't mean that you just throw away a great story or characterization or depth like this movie provides it. This is like a callback to early blockbuster filmmaking of like Spielberg or like even George Lucas, like Jaws or something like Star Wars, where it's like, we're introducing you to this world, and we have like the spectacle. You have Godzilla. Of course, Godzilla's horrifying, and he's a monster in this movie, very much so, lives up to that King of the Monsters name. But the thing that's going to keep you attached to this movie are the characters. And it takes place, initially it's towards the end of World War II. We follow this kamikaze pilot named Koichi, who's like, I don't want to be a kamikaze pilot. He lands on an island. He basically fakes that I need engine repairs or something. And on that island, controlled by the Japanese military, he encounters a Godzilla, proto-Godzilla, basically, who kills everyone. And he ends up not helping those people, probably would have resulted in his death. Then it's like 2 years afterwards, he goes back He goes back home. Japan is devastated because of the war. He meets this woman. He falls in love with her, and she's raising a baby that she found in the wreckage. And everyone's trying to put their lives back together, right? And then fucking Godzilla comes in. He's been irradiated. He's been mutated due to the Americans testing in the Bikini Atoll Islands. And he's like, I see a lot of people here, and I don't like them. And he just starts killing them. This Godzilla's vindictive. We don't have, usually like Godzilla's like, well, he's a force of nature. He doesn't even notice anybody. This Godzilla's like, I see all of you. I'm going to step on all of you. It's like, wow. He's a nasty son of a bitch in this movie. And this community, much like the community in Jaws, is like, what are we going to do? The government won't help us. The Americans are like, we ain't getting involved. We don't want to get involved because of, the Cold War and the Ruskies. I think we put everything aside to deal with this situation, but whatever. But they're like, we got to get together. We got to pull together and figure out the situation. And they do. And it's great. It's a fantastic blockbuster, a palate cleanser to the sloppy blockbuster filmmaking that we've gotten. But it's probably the greatest Godzilla film of all time. And I love it. I love it. This deserves recognition. It should be nominated for Best Picture. It should probably be nominated for Best Director. It deserves many accolades, chat. Many nominations. And I'm glad so many people have responded to this film and have been checking it out. And also kind of just putting Godzilla back in there. Not that he ever left, but just really people are like, oh, kaiju are awesome. Like they are. But my number one best movie of 2023 is Alexander Payne's The Holdovers, chat. Now, for those that don't know, The Holdovers is set in 1970s New England, follows a bad-tempered history teacher played by Paul Giamatti, who is bitter due to life, and he is forced to chaperone a handful of students at this private boarding school, this private Catholic boarding school, and ends up really most of the students leave at one point, and he's pretty much just interacting with two other people, Dominic Sessa, who is the student, who is quite brilliant, very smart, but also angry and has a variety of issues, and the head cook, the head chef of the boarding school, played by Divine Joy Randolph. And they pretty much end up spending Christmas break together and learning more about each other the entire time. There's trials and there's tribulations, but there's very warm and wholesome and sad, heart-rendering moments. And this is going to be a Christmas classic. This is probably one of my favorite Christmas movies in quite some time. May not sell itself as a Christmas movie, but Alexander Payne himself is like, I didn't intend to make a heartwarming Christmas movie. That's what you did, dude. You made a very heartwarming Christmas movie. I mean, there's so much. I've seen this movie like 3 times since I originally watched it. Like I was just like, what am I in the mood for? I was like, like I'm tired. I want to be awake to like review a movie and not kind of like fall asleep to it. But I'm gonna put The Holdovers on because there's something about that movie. And the thing is, like, a lot of me's in this movie, I feel like, because it reminded me of my high school career. I went to a private Catholic high school, not a boarding school, but a private Catholic high school. And I interacted with so many of the characters that are in this movie. So many people that were so similar, whether it be Dominic Sessa's character, certainly Paul Giamatti's character, even Divine Joy Randolph's character. It felt so real and earnest and wholesome and honest. And there are so many powerful moments in this movie that made me water eye, made me cry. I think it's going to get a lot of award attention. It deserves to. But it just has this like great message in the movie that despite the circumstances that life has thrown at you, despite the struggles, don't have those things just define you for your entire life. You can make these changes yourself. It's like, yeah, sometimes you need to be to push to do so. Sometimes you just need to talk to someone who can finally understand you on your level and see the humanity in you. And someone you may have hated, you like, oh, this is the way you are. This is how you are. And in doing so, you discover something better about yourself that maybe you wouldn't have even thought about or even acknowledged or even denied, and it comes out in you. It's just such a beautiful movie. It also is it's a fantastic. If you're a huge fan of Dead Poet Society, has a lot in common with Dead Poet Society. I actually recommend kind of watching those films as like a double feature, and they have so much of the wholesomeness that has certainly made Dead Poet Society a classic, nearly 40 years going now at this point. So. Yeah, The Holdovers, Chad. It is my favorite movie this year. It's one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time. It is going to be, I think, considered like one of the most heartwarming, quintessential movies of the 2020s. But that, my friends, that is my top 10 best movies, favorite movies of 2023, along with a considerable amount of honorable mentions. What about you guys? What about you out there? What are your top 10 best movies? What are some of your honorable mentions? Please let me know.